My name is Tom Van Dam. I'm a Dutch guy, lived in China for 6 years. I work at Netease. I'm the head of mobile business development. Netease is a very large internet company in China that does email, does news, media, but it makes most of the money developing games. It's done so for a really long time. We've been listed on the Nasdaq for a very long time. It's a very valuable company. Unfortunately, not everyone in the rest of the world knows us, but that's getting better. Why is it getting better? Because we're developing some really awesome games and they're making a lot of money. So I do business development for outside China regions. My job is to go and find developers that have content that could potentially work in the Chinese market. Not necessarily directly by taking their content and putting it on the market, but content that we believe we could work on with our development teams and then bring it to China in a modified format. As a developer, we also have a lot of content ourselves. So now that we've established ourselves on the mobile market in China, we think that we can also look at other markets, more global market. So we're trying to develop some content specifically suited to a non-Chinese audience, although that's very early stage. So we're trying to find the right partners, be it publishers or other localization or local support. So I'm looking around for those. And we also have an appetite for investment in small studios that have just started or have been around for a while, but at least have a very strong team. Have some experience, or they know what they're doing something they've done in the past, and we'd like to back them potentially in the future to also use their products in China, but we could also look at a more global market.
Of course, and I think you've touched upon there one of the big themes in the gaming industry, mobile gaming industry in particular, I think, is about that exchange between China and the rest of the world that's going on. The process of Chinese companies attempting to come over to the West and either adapting or developing new products for those markets, and companies that are based, say, in Europe and America, developing products that are specifically designed with the Chinese market in mind. What are the major challenges for companies going either way? So what's the challenge for Chinese developers moving one way? What's the challenge for American and European developers going the other way? And are there any sort of similarities in the problems they're facing?
I think the main similarity in the problem is that both sides, and then I'm talking East versus West, doesn't truly understand the other side, at least on a development level. It's very hard for a developer that has experience in his home market to be able to develop something that truly appeals to another market entirely. And I think you see that in both directions. So you have Chinese developers, Chinese teams, they're trying to make games that they think appeal to a Western audience, but as a Western person you would say, well, clearly it's still with heavy Asian influence. And similarly, when Western developers try to put their games to Asia or to China specifically, they say, okay, we've got a really, really great game, but from a Chinese player's perspective, that might not at all be the case.
And I think one of the interesting examples that I heard, it was talking to the developer behind Despicable Me Minion Rush. And the example that they gave me was that in the European market, when you ran towards one of the end of the level, say you got killed and you had to make a choice about whether you wanted to carry on playing or not. What they would say to a player in a European market is pay a premium currency and you would be restarted. But when they moved over to China and they were testing it during the soft launch process, they found out that actually what worked more effectively is asking Chinese individuals just to pay a very, very tiny amount to basically continue or not. So instead of having the premium currency issue there, people just pay directly in the local and native currency through carrier billing. And as a result of that, they were able to take Despicable Me Minion Rush and make it one of the top grossing games in China. I thought it was a really interesting example because it showed the way that different market dynamics work, the way that different people do. And so what would be your advice for a developer, say, who's based in Europe and is thinking about going over to China? What would be your top piece of advice for designing games that really have that market in mind?
I think there are three roads to the Chinese market, and one might be more suited than the others. Essentially, you can be modest and say, okay, my goal is not to attack the top 100 or top 50, but instead I'm happy to get a nice piece of revenue and continue doing my thing. Then you can be better. You can essentially compete head-on by creating the same type of gameplay and just trying to improve it, maybe the graphics or an addition of a level or a gameplay mode. But that's very hard because you're essentially competing with local players that have more expertise than you on the particular market. So the third way is to essentially be surprising. You bring something to the market what hasn't been seen before. An interesting example, for example, would be Monument Valley, which did quite all right in China because it was something people just hadn't seen before at all. And so if you mentioned the example of Minion Rush, but if we look at the top 50 in China today, there's only 4 games that haven't been developed in China, and 2 of those are Supercell. One of it is Hearthstone, and then there's a FPS game. So you can actually see that there's just not a lot that actually will do really well across the market.
All right, well, thanks very much.
All right, thank you.